Daniel 11, verse 45, the subject of the King of the North. What did the Seventh-day Adventist pioneers believe in regards to this question? Some say that the pioneers believed that the King of the North was the papacy. However, others disagree. They say that the pioneers of the Advent movement believed that the King of the North was Turkey. Well, what is the true and accurate answer to this question? We will be answering this question in this presentation next on the Guard Post. Again, I am your host, Juan Contreras, and I'm sitting here with Brother Jonathan Herrera. And so this is a discussion that's been going on for years in regards to what did the pioneers believe in regards to the King of the North. So in this presentation, we're going to answer that very question. And we're going to begin by dividing the pioneers. So this is what the pioneers believed. So we have our Millerite pioneers from 1840 to 1863, 1863 being the year that they officially organized into the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And we also have the Seventh-day Adventist pioneers and writings from 1870 to 1950. So we're going to take the Millerite pioneer statements on what they penned in regards to Daniel 11, the King of the North and South. And we're also going to take some of the statements that we have found from the Seventh-day Adventist pioneers, statements again on Daniel 11, the King of the North, and also King of the South. So this will help us to answer this very question. We're going to go to the source, we're going to review the record, and we're going to see what the pioneers believe. So we're going to start with William Miller himself. William Miller lived through, he was born in 1782 and died in the year of 1849. And this is his statement in regards to his viewpoint. Quote, "We therefore begin at the 40th verse of the 11th chapter of Daniel. And at the time of the end of this papal civil power, now another person has obtained this civil power. This was Bonaparte, the ruler of the French nation. At this time, then, our prophecy begins. And Bonaparte is a person designated by the pronouns he and him in the prophecy." So what is William Miller saying here? Well, take note. It says, "We therefore begin at the 40th verse," right? That's the beginning point. But notice that he says that at the time of the end, he adds, "of this papal civil power." Now we know at the time of the end was 1798. But in here, in this statement, he's referring this to the end of this papal civil power.
To point right there, Juan, because today many get into a little controversy about when is the time of the end. Some will put them ahead of time, but we're seeing that even William Miller pointed out that the time of the end was 1798. And from that point, this is where the prophecy starts off.
Correct. And what happens, according to William Miller and what he's saying here, that at the end, that is at the end of this papal civil power, he's saying another person has obtained this civil power. And he tells us his understanding of who this person is. Who is it? Well, it's Bonaparte, the ruler of the French nation, right? Basically France.
Right.
And this is what is to be understood by the what? By the pronouns he and him in the prophecy. So it is France, according to his understanding, or William Miller's understanding, that the pronouns he and him refers none other than to France.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's another statement, verse 40, "And at the time of the end, that is of the papacy or of Antichrist, shall the king of the south, Spain, push at France, Vandine war, and the king of the north, Great Britain, shall come against France, like a whirlwind with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. And the French or Bonaparte, the principal ruler, shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. So William Miller's understanding of the time of the end here is that the time of the end is the time of the end of the Antichrist, which would be the papacy. And then he goes on to explain that the king of the south was none other than Spain. And this is referring to pushing at France in the Vandine War. And the king of the north was Great Britain.
This is good of him, what he just did on this verse. He's trying to help us understand. He's breaking it down in this verse, and he's presenting three powers, three identities in this verse.
Correct. Yeah, three identities, right, exactly, which so many miss today, right? But this wasn't overlooked by William Miller, and we're going to see others as well. They saw three powers in verse 40. So we have a contemporary next to William Miller, and that is Joshua B. Himes. Joshua B. Himes, he was born in 1805 and passed in the year of 1896. And this is what Joshua B. Himes penned in regards to this question. Quote, if this is correct, then France is intended by he or him in this prophecy. In order then to give my view, the reader will permit me to paraphrase these few remaining verses. And now he's going to paraphrase. And the time of the end of Antichrist shall the king of the south, Spain, push at France, Vandine war, and the king of the north, Great Britain, shall come against France like a whirlwind with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. And the French, or Bonaparte, the principal ruler, shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. It's almost like a very identical to William Miller's understanding.
There are a line right here. They're both seeing that at him is representing France.
Correct. And the king of the south, in their understanding, was Spain, and the king of the north, in their understanding, was Great Britain. But again, we see the pronoun he or him here. That obviously was their understanding, referred to none other than France. So the next statement reads, and at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. It will be necessary for the reader to observe and for me to remark in this place that the inspired writers and their descriptions or their description of kingdoms or principal governments use the pronouns he or him instead of naming them, as in the preceding description of Antichrist, or as Paul uses it in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 7, and many other places might be named. He continues, therefore, I understand the pronouns in the above named 40th verse and those following in the chapter to refer to the same kingdom or principal ruler in said kingdom, and that the angel has reference to the principal kingdom of the 10 kingdoms into which the Roman was divided when Antichrist arose, which shall hate the whore and shall make her desolate and naked and shall eat her and burn her with fire. Revelation 17:12-16. If this is correct, then France is intended by he or him in this prophecy. In order then to give my view, the reader will permit me to paraphrase these few remaining verses in which we already read. So again, who is represented by the pronouns he or him?
France. He's the one who basically inflicts the deadly wound at the time of the end. At that time of the end, the papacy is on its decline and finally is removed from that power that was going to be granted for her to persecute. And therefore, at that time of the end, it's France. There's no other one that inflicted this damage to the beast or
Correct.
the power.
Correct. So let's go ahead and read his paraphrase one more time. Repetition is good so that we can have a good understanding of what um, Elder Vimes believed during his time. Again, verse 40, and the time of the end of Antichrist shall the king of the south, Spain, push at France, Bendian war, and the king of the north, Great Britain, shall come against France like a whirlwind with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. And the French or Bonaparte, the principal ruler, shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. Once again, we are seeing that he shared the same viewpoint in regards to this question with William Miller. Bonaparte shall enter also into the glorious land, Italy, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of Bonaparte's hands, even Edom and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon, Ottomans and Eastern nations. So now he's given, of course, more information in regards to verse 41 and sharing with us his understanding of this particular verse. So once again, the king of the north, Great Britain, king of the south, Spain, and the pronoun he or him, France. This was their understanding, at least of Joshua B. Himes and of William Miller himself. Charles Fitch, he lived, or he was born rather, in the year of 1805 and died or passed in the year of 1844. And this is what he penned. Here we have a most striking epitome of the history of Bonaparte. All that was here foretold was true of him, as history abundantly shows. He did plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in Italy, which we know as between two seas, and which has ever been the glorious holy mountain of the Romans. And on the 15th of May, 1796, Bonaparte took possession of Milan in Italy. And at that place, on the 26th of May in 1805, he was crowned king of Italy. Thus he planted the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain of the Romans. So here we have, Fitch's understanding, and we see here that the glorious holy mountain was none other than Italy, right?
Yeah, I just caught that today, many think that the glorious land is the United States. I don't know if you've heard of some say that the glorious land is the United States in regards to this chapter. And it's interesting that they were putting Italy as the glorious land.
Right. And Italy is a literal geographical location as well. But nonetheless, that was the application, at least from Charles Fitch, in regards to the king who was going to plant his tabernacles of his palace. This was going to be done in Italy. Again, notice here, thus he planted the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, which it was believed to be Italy. Now, in regards to what you said, yes, today we do hear that some believe that the glorious holy mountain is the U.S. or the United States of America. But there's also another viewpoint in that the glorious holy mountain is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so this is what causes confusion, because we get verses from the Bible and we spiritualize them. And now it's up to the instructor to give his understanding of what that means. And this is what happens when you spiritualize a text.
Because basically the chapter 11 of Daniel is all geographic, it's all nations, it's kingdoms, it's so far in the first verses of Daniel 11, there's nothing spiritualized. And it's interesting how the modern teaching at a certain point, like they spiritualize it. It doesn't let Gabriel, who is basically giving the explanation of what Daniel couldn't understand. I mean, we've seen in the previous chapter in the book of Daniel, there were visions, there were symbols. Gabriel came in and he gives the literal explanation. In chapter 10, Daniel, or 9 and 10, Daniel is perplexed. There's are things he cannot understand. And here comes once again Gabriel to give the literal explanation. So there is no room for any to spiritualize this chapter because it's literally the explanation given by Gabriel.
Right. And even these men, the men that we're reading from, even though their application is different from other pioneers, as we will see here further in our study, they were applying it to literal geographical areas. They were not spiritualizing these texts at all. So that's, I think, important to note. But let's continue reading what Fitch had to say here. Continuing on, he says, but he came to his end on a solitary island, as we well know, and none helped him. All these predicted events, therefore, are now in the history of the past. So here, of course, Charles Fitch believed that this prophecy had its fulfillment, right? But again, what we're seeing is what the Millerite pioneers believed during their time. And we have another Millerite pioneer, his name, Charles Litch. Charles Litch was born in 1809 and passed or died in the year of 1886. And this is what he penned. Such a system as is here described was the French Revolution. It was founded in atheism and triumphed in the overthrow of everything which interposed a barrier to their object. The seed of this revolution were sown by Voltaire, the noted French infidel, who in early youth vowed to dedicate his life to the extermination of Christianity. So I see that there's a unity in seeing Francis' role in prophecy, specifically in chapter 11. I'm sorry, did you say something?
Yes, in verse 40, they're on the same grounds, pointing that he is France.
Correct.
Because of the time at the end, at that time, it was France.
Right. So he continues on, and he states the following: the king of the south should push at him. At whom? The answer is at the subject of prophecy in the preceding verses, the revolutionary government of France. There you go. That power is clearly antecedent to him in this verse, the king of the south. And who is the king of the south? The answer is given in the exposition of the first 6 verses of the chapter, which to the reader can examine. It is clearly the government of Egypt. So we have now a different viewpoint here. Litch believes that the king of the south is Egypt, not Spain, as the former pioneers penned, correct? Let's keep reading. I do not know that there is a dissenting voice to the application of this term to Egypt in the former part of this chapter, nor can I see any good reason why there should be in the latter part, as long as it was literally fulfilled in Egypt. Yeah. So again, the government of France is the one government that is referred to as he or him, or is known as with those pronouns, and applying the king of the south to be the government of Egypt.
Notice where he points out why he changed it, or I don't know if to say change, but why he's pointing out that the south is Egypt. He's pointing out to the first 6 verses of that chapter. That's how he came to that conclusion that Egypt, the king of the south, because the first 6 verses, when the kingdom of Alexander the Great was divided, one of them was Egypt, and so he's going back. He's getting these answers straight from the same chapter. Egypt was king of the south.
Right. Right. And he finishes his thought with the following, that a collision did actually take place between the French and Egypt is notorious. Next came Saint Jean the Acre in Syria, the king of the north. Now, here's another application. Now, the king of the north is, who is the king of the north here? Is in Syria. Saint Jean the Acre is now, which is in Syria, the king of the north. And he keeps saying, which was to come against him like a whirlwind. So now we have a different understanding of who the king of the south is and who the king of the north is as well. So we see something new being expounded or being published.
He's basically going back to the verses of that chapter, letting Gabriel give that literal explanation. So now, geographically, there's a shift from the previous two writers. This one now presents, just like chapter 11, introduce who was the king of the north, or where was the location of the king of the north and the location of the king of the south. He is going and letting or going by the explanation of the beginning of the verses of chapter 11.
Correct. So next we have seen some of the Millerite pioneers and some of their statements in regards to this question regarding the king of the north, the king of the south, and their understanding of the pronoun he or him. So now we're going to take a look at a few Seventh-day Adventist pioneers and what they believed on this question. So we're going to start off with Stephen Haskell. Stephen Haskell was born in the year 1833, and he died in the year of 1922. And this is what he had to say. The sealing angel goes through Jerusalem, that is the church, to place the seal of the living God on the foreheads of the faithful. And while this work goes forward, Turkey stands as a national guidepost to the world, that men may know what is going on in the sanctuary above. So he doesn't really get into answering or saying who the king of the north is here, but nevertheless, he mentions Turkey stands as a national guidepost to the world, right? And that men may know what is going on in the sanctuary above. In the next statement, he says the following. This treaty was signed and the ultimatum was officially put in power by Muhammad Ali on August 11, 1840. Since that time, Turkey has been known everywhere as the sick man of the East. Daniel prophesied concerning him, saying, he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. At any moment, when the jealous powers of Europe can decide, either peaceably or in battle, which one of them shall occupy Constantinople, the sick man will speedily take his departure from Europe. That movement, for which nations are now on the margin alert, will be the sign of still more important changes in the heavenly court. Very interesting statement here by Stephen Haskell. But notice that to his understanding, the power that would, plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain was Turkey. And Turkey, or the power that would transfer their tabernacles of their palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, is obviously the king of the north.
Well, they're starting to see that the location is very important. You start off with Syria, so they're thinking who holds possession of that same area at that time. The ones who hold possession, just like the king of the south, which we at the previous quote we read was Egypt, who's taking possession of Syria. It is Turkey. So that's why the conclusion of what Stephen Haskell is writing, of that person being in that or that power being in that area.
Correct. So we're seeing here that Stephen Haskell's understanding was that the king of the north was Turkey. Now we're going to focus our attention on the pioneer A.T. Jones. And A.T. Jones was born in the year 1850 and he died in 1923. And this is what he penned in regards to this question. In these studies, we have seen that a number of times in the last 50 years, the Turkish government would have come to an end had it not been distinctly helped. Indeed, we have seen that the Turkish government could not have existed at all these 50 years if it had not been distinctly helped by the powers whose relations are the substance of the Eastern question. By all, it is expected that the Turkish government must leave Constantinople. Many a time in these years, it has been expected that the Turkish government must certainly leave Constantinople. The tabernacles of his palace will be planted in Jerusalem, between the seas, in the glorious holy mountain. And when that time comes, which must inevitably come soon, at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. So we have the same understanding that Stephen Haskell had in regards to the king of the north, right? So A.T. Jones, same viewpoint, same understanding we see thus far. Now, what about E.J. Wagner? What did E.J. Wagner pen or believed? Well, he was born in the year 1855 and he died in the year 1928. And this is what he had to say. That the world is on the threshold of great changes and startling events is very evident. The development of the Eastern question from week to week show that there is less and less a disposition to help the Turkish power to stand. He quotes now, "He shall come to his end and none shall help him," Daniel 11:45. That we know, and while it seems probable that once again the powers will agree to keep him up, every time that services are requisitioned, the case becomes more desperate and the situation more insecure. We have often repeated it and shall often do so, that when he does come to his end, the time of trouble comes for all nations. Less than a year ago, Lord Salisbury told why the powers are so anxious to maintain the Turkish power. His words we then printed as a striking comment on Daniel's prediction of the scenes which would be enacted when the king of the north was no longer propped up. They are as follows. So again, what did E.J. Wagner believe in regards to the king of the north? Same identity, right? Same power. It was the Turkish power.
You know what I'm noticing too here? That so far, we have not read anything about Uriah Smith. Because sometimes people tend to think or link that the concept or the teaching of the king of the north, it was only Uriah Smith, is not a true statement. This statement is false. We're seeing that Haskell, Wagner, and there are many others during that pioneer times, after the 1860s, that they had the same thought. They had the same teaching that the king of the north was Turkey.
Right. Yeah. When someone is teaching about the king of the north, they're quick to attribute these viewpoints to Uriah Smith, but that's not the case. But anyhow, what about James White? He was around when Haskell and Wagner and Jones were around. What about James White? We often hear James White believed that the king of the north was the papacy, right?
Yes, that's something that today is brought up, and especially James White being the husband of the prophet, being the husband of Mrs. White. He had this other view, and I think where we're heading at, Brother Juan, is this is very important. we've seen Haskell, Wagner, and Uriah Smith all in harmony. Is there any relevance? Is it even important to be on the same page when this is being taught? And now we're going to see what happened with James White.
Yeah. So we're going to look at what James White had to say, not necessarily on his view on the King of the North, but other commentary of his that I find quite significant to this question in regards to the viewpoint of others who were contemporary to James White and how he felt about the viewpoints that were being, shared or taught during his time frame. So this is what he had to say. So again, James White, he was born in 1821 and he died in 1881. Here's the statement. But as I cannot harmonize either of these views, speaking of two views of when Michael stands up, with the Bible, I wish to humbly give my brethren and sisters my view of these events. Michael is to stand up at the time that the last power in chapter 11 comes to his end, and none to help him. Again, he's referring to chapter 11, verse 45. Continue reading. This power is the last that treads down the true church of God. And as a true church is to trodden down and cast out by all Christendom, it follows that the last oppressive power has not come to his end, and Michael has not stood up. This last power that treads down the saints is brought to view in Revelation 13, 11 through 18. His number is 666. This is taken from A Word to the Little Flock, one of his very early works. So it's obvious from the information that we're getting from this publication that he believed that the King of the North was the papacy. But what I want to highlight is, notice here that he says that he's obviously, it's his humble opinion or his understanding from his Bible study given to his brothers and sisters. Notice here, my view of these events, right? And he starts off by saying that, but as I cannot harmonize either of these views, speaking of two views when Michael stands up. So he obviously couldn't harmonize the views that were being shared during his time or very early on with his own understanding from his own study of the scriptures.
With this, what you're just reading, that he's seeing that his view might be distinct and, well, you got Haskell, Wagner, Uriah Smith. Seems like he pointed out my view. It seems like it's at that time of period, it was basically his view and not what the majority was holding on to.
Well, yes, but this was penned in the publication, A Word to the Little Flock, which was a publication written way back in the 1850s, if I'm correct. But in the Review and Herald of the year 1877, he shared what I understand a very similar sentiment. Again, he found himself in the midst of brothers and sisters who differ with him on this very subject. And this is what I'm going to share here on the next statement here. Notice here, this again from the Review and Herald, November 29, 1877, he states the following. It may be said there is a general agreement upon this subject, and that all eyes are turned toward the war now in progress between Turkey and Russia as a fulfillment of the portion of the prophecy which will give confirmation of faith in the soon loud cry and close of our message. But what will be the results of this positiveness in unfulfilled prophecies should things not come out as very confidently expected as an anxious question? Now, in this statement, he begins, very similar from what I see, saying that, note here, it may be said there is a general agreement upon this subject. In other words, there seems to be a general agreement of what, the people are believing in regards to the subject of Daniel 11, verse 45, and the standing up of Michael, but he doesn't seem to be in harmony with that understanding. You see? So you wonder if William Miller ever actually held a solid position on this question, and even more so with what his son had to say in regards to his father, James White. And I would like to share the following from Willie White that helps us understand a little bit more in regards to the position of James White. Again, Willie White. So this is what Willie White had to say. During the few months preceding this meeting, I had read Daniel and the Revelation by Elder Uriah Smith. I love the writer and admire his style. I loved his teaching, and I was shocked when Elder White presented another view regarding the King of the North. One day I said to him, "Father, I have just read Elder Smith's book, and his exposition seems clear to me. Do you really believe that Rome is the king of the north?" This is Willie White asking his father, James White. Let's keep reading. His answer was, "I think Elder Smith is going too fast in his exposition, and I thought it was time to present something to check the current of belief that what is transpiring was the beginning of Armageddon." So what does that tell you? Did he really held to the belief that Rome as the king of the north was really his solid belief? Or rather that, again, he was trying to check a movement who he thought was on the verge of fanaticism?
Not only that, Willie points out that he came in with a different view. So he's in this letter, he's sharing that there was seemed to be an agreement, and then his father comes with a different view held by the other pioneers.
Right. And there's more information as we read. And note this. And when he heard Elder Smith's presentation, fear seized his soul, and he threw his exposition on Daniel 11. Not so much that he really believed it, as that he thought it would shake a movement that he thought was bordering into fanaticism and might lead to the hindrance of the work to be done. He was reproved by the Lord for bringing in distrust as to the unity of the leaders and sank down in discouragement, and thus the great financial campaign collapsed.
We can see here then there is an important thing to bring up right here. Today, many think it doesn't matter. There's not an importance, but unity is key. Unity is key, and that's what Jesus even prayed for. That we find that recording in John 17. He wanted his people to be one, like-minded, to speak the same, not be in confusion. One preaches one thing, the other preaches the other. This will not, if we are to just leave with that mind, that it doesn't matter who it is, doesn't matter if he teaches us one way or teaches us the other, this is going to show that we are not united. And I see then the key important thing is to be united, to have the same teaching, because if not, it creates confusion. And who will want to be part of a group that's in chaos or confusion, that one doesn't believe what the other believes? And when you go to a meeting, it's different types of beliefs.
Correct. Another important factor to note is that many who believe today that the king of the north is the papacy, we often hear the claim that, well, the pioneers believe that. But as we have seen so far, that has not been the case. aside from James White, who his own son questioned whether he believed that or not, right? But something that was tied into their understanding of Turkey being the king of the north and Daniel 11:45 is coming to his end is very much related to Armageddon. Very, very close tied to Armageddon. And I find it interesting because James White, his view on Armageddon was similar to the Brotherhood during that time. That they had the same understanding on Armageddon. As we will note here, when we read what James had to say in regards to Armageddon, note what he penned. These plagues, from the very nature of the case, must be manifestations of wrath and judgments upon men. But if the drying up of the literal Euphrates is all that is brought to view, nobody is hurt, and the plague turns out to be no serious affair after all. These objections existing against its being taken literally, it must be understood figuratively as symbolizing the power holding position of its territory, which is the Ottoman or Turkish Empire. It is so used in other places in the scriptures, and then he refers what scriptures. And he continues, in this latter text, all must concede that the Euphrates symbolizes who? The Turkish power, and being the first and only other occurrence of the word in the Revelation, it may well be considered as governing in its use in this book. The drying up of the river in this sense would be the consumption of the Turkish power, accompanied with more or less destruction of its subjects. Thus, we should have literal judgments upon men as a result of this plague, as in the case of all the rest. So, again, even those who believe or say or they claim that they believe similar to James White, it's not true based on the record. James White was in harmony with his brethren in regards to Armageddon and the involvement of the Turkish through the drying up of the river Euphrates. So, unfortunately, those who, again, who claim that they believe similar to James White, that's not true at all.
Yeah, because today Armageddon is spiritualized as well. I think it's a spiritual battle. Some I've heard link it with Jacob's trouble. That's Armageddon. It's a spiritual warfare, a spiritual of whether you forget, have you confess your sins, and that's the interpretation I've heard today in modern. Changing it from what the pioneers believed. They believed it was a literal war. It was a literal battle between nations.
Correct. So what we have seen thus far is the Millerite pioneers. What was their belief? What was their understanding? Well, we saw quotes from William Miller. And what was Miller's viewpoint or understanding on the King of the North? Well, from his pen, we saw that it was Great Britain. And who was the willful king, or the pronoun he or him?
France.
Well, France. Right? And we also saw another pioneer, Joshua V. Himes, Millerite pioneer. He also believed that the king of the North was Great Britain and that the willful king was France. And we saw Charles Fitch. He also believed the same. And finally, Josiah Litch, he believed, and I didn't add that, but he believed that the king of the north was Syria and the king of the south was Egypt, but the willful king was still France. So they had in harmony that the willful king was also France, even though by this time Josiah Litch, his understanding in regards to the king of the south and the king of the north differed. And we also have seen quotes by the Seventh-day Adventist pioneers. James White obviously believed that the king of the north was Rome, right? And the willful king was Rome. We saw from Stephen Haskell's pen, the king of the north, was Turkey. And even though we didn't cite a quote regarding the willful king, for those who are Bereans, which we hope every one of you are, search this out. You will find that Stephen Haskell believed that the willful king, or the pronoun he or him, was also France. The same thing for A.T. Jones. The king of the north was Turkey, the willful king, France. A.G. Wagner, he believed likewise, the king of the north, Turkey, the willful king, again, France. And here we have a quarterly, Sabbath School quarterly that was republished by Pioneer Health and Missions a year or so. And so this represents the viewpoint of the church. This was a reproduction of a Sabbath School quarterly that was printed back in 1904 by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And we see that its pages teach that the king of the north is Turkey and that the willful king is France. And I'll almost can say that every Seventh-day Adventist knows about Bible readings for the home circle. And I believe that the last edition of this publication was in the 1940s. And in its pages that was put together by over 100 Bible students, it's also taught that the king of the north is Turkey, and the willful king is France. So it is during this time here that the church has a position on the king of the north, and the position is that Turkey is the king of the north and that France is the willful king.
I got that book, the Bible Readings for the Home, the 49th edition, and interesting, the section, the title of that section is called The Eastern Question. And Mrs. White, she has several quotes where she speaks about the Eastern Question. And something I would like to mention, Brother Juan, we're bringing up the pioneers and then how they were in agreement. And one might think we don't need to study from other people, but that's contrary to what the prophet wrote. In Manuscripts Released, volume 17 on page 3, she actually admonishes and tells us to study the prophecy of the students of prophecy. Speaking of her time, that they studied the prophecy and that we are to learn from their pen, their writings. And sadly, today, I've heard many say, I don't need the pioneers. Don't bring me the pioneers. But the prophet, that's what it's telling us, to study what they wrote, what they held as truth when they were in harmony.
That would be a good presentation there. Should we believe what the pioneers believed? Because there's references that we believe are inspired references. In other words, this is a testimony of Jesus. So if we ask the testimony of Jesus, should we believe what the pioneers believe? We'll find the answer. So that would be good, because this information needs to be out before the people. So that would be an excellent presentation. So what we have seen once again thus far, what did the pioneers believe in regards to Daniel 11, or the king of the north, king of the south, and the pronoun he or him? Well, I believe that this presentation has answered that question. And during the Millerite period, there were really no one held the same view. Three leading Millerite pioneers shared the same viewpoint. Josiah Lidge had a different perspective, but it was when the Seventh-day Adventist Church organized, and later on in years as they became students of prophecy, that, as a matter of fact, that's how the book Daniel and the Revelation came to be. There's references to that because it was done through a Bible study group that was put together, and that's how they became familiar with Daniel 11:45 and what is represented by the power of the king of the north, king of the south, etc. And so this is what we have now: an organization or a movement that is unison or in harmony with one viewpoint. Of course, aside from Brother James White.
So it's important, like I stated earlier, it's important to preach the same topic, the same presentation, because it will speak a lot. It will speak a lot to that movement, that they are really united. It is important because it's this prayer of Christ that we can teach, be one. The scripture speaks about being like-minded, and this will being in unity always brings positive. It's a positive for everything. People will see how united the group of believers are.
That's right. So thank you, each and every one of you. It's your job, your responsibility to make sure of all things and to see whether these things are so. So God bless you and keep you.
The Guard Post, keeping you in tune with current events and defending the faith that was once delivered to the saints.